Hey gang, it's Boxing Day, 26th of December 2021, and this is episode 171. Good God, Mark's never going to run out of things to talk about, is he? Well, I will, eventually. Last time I did one of these, a couple of days ago, I said I was going to talk about Underworld's Dubnobasswithmyheadman, and I completely failed to talk about the album, and instead talked about the band and the run-up to the release of the album instead. And basically spent many minutes telling you how good a track Res was, or is, depending on your point of view. It still sounds great. I listened to it today, and I danced whilst I was walking down the street. Not a dignified look, but life's too short to look dignified and have a good time at the same time, sometimes. My brain's confused now. Anyway, Underworld's third studio album, the first good one, was released in January 1994. It was called Dubnobasswithmyheadman. Its title taken from Cole Hyde misreading a handwritten tape label in the band's studio. And I went, is this called? And then, oh, that's a good name for the album. And so here we are, 27 years later, 28 next month, talking about the album and how good it is. So I've kind of very quick history lesson for those of you that have not bothered to read or watch the other episodes. Blah blah, Underworld, split, reformed, and released some singles under the name Live and Interrupt, including the track Dirty here. This is the first song, Dirty is the first song of theirs that I definitely remember hearing. It was on a Melody Maker promo cassette that came free with the newspaper. And I listened to it, and I thought, this is interesting. And then after that, you know me, I'm an obsessive compulsive, and it's not a disorder. If it's all alphabetically filed, it's obsessive compulsive order. And after that, I never really looked back. So Dirty was the first track by Underworld that I ever heard. And I think Res might have been the other one. Although I probably would have heard Res and Cowgirl in a club and not known what it was and just thought, oh, that sounds fantastic. But Dirty is the prototype version of a track that later got a more formal release. Obviously, there was the second single, although calling it a single is an overstatement, really. It wasn't exactly designed to hit the charts. It was released in a generic Junior Boys Own thing. It didn't even have a barcode on it of Eclipse and Big Mouth. Then Skyscraper, I Love You. I love this song, by the way. Absolutely fantastic. Listen to it again today. Of course, the Res promo 12-inch backed with the 12-inch, well, the 12-minute version of Why. And then finally the first commercial release for Res outside of its promo configuration as a 12-inch with Res on the A side and a mix of Cowgirl on the B. This, I think, was the first time that Cowgirl was released in the UK. I don't think Cowgirl got a separate single release, actually, which is pretty weird. In fact, the first time it got a separate single release was in the year 2000, when it came to accompany the album Everything Everything, which was Underworld recorded live in the year 1999, with remixes by Bedrock and Future Shock on it. So the first time most people would have heard Cowgirl, unless it was pumping out of a stereo, would have been to when they put the B-side on of Res and went, oh my, this is a banger. So yes, Res and Cowgirl, a 12-inch that launched 1,000 crazy nights out, indeed. During 1993, the band were playing live. They played, I think, their first show, or one of their first shows, at the Experimental Soundfield in Glastonbury in 1992. And it was a combination of DJs spinning songs and the band playing over the top of the songs and then switching the songs off and playing live sets and improvisations. Someone, thankfully, has recorded the Experimental Soundfield show and uploaded 90 minutes of it onto, I think, YouTube and Mixcloud, so you can hear one of the very first Underworld shows. Over the whole course of the 90 minutes, the band only play about 3 or 4 songs. And it's really weird to hear kind of how effortless the band were at that point in melding in and out of records and other people's work, whilst also sounding like themselves in a way that nobody else ever did. I should point out, by the way, that live Underworld at this point, between about 1992 and about 2005, 2006, maybe up to 2008, were an astonishing live prospect. Their live shows, it was kind of like watching a techno version of the Grateful Dead, improvising new songs on stage in front of people, not knowing necessarily which song they were going to play next, where they were going to go, not having a set list. Some nights they didn't play any songs off the album. Other nights they didn't play the big hits, so they didn't play Rares or Cowgirl or anything like that, and they just effectively just jammed on stage once people watched them, and they played a continuous kind of set of music as the songs melded in and out of each other. And I've got some curious thoughts about the band's live presentation, which I think I'll get to probably when I talk about the Everything Everything Live album. But those live shows from 1992 through to about 2008, I mean, some of the best gigs of my life were seeing Underworld at that point, especially when the show itself, or the concert, the performance, wasn't really a performance. It was more like watching the band make it up as they were going along. And sometimes, of course, they fell flat on their faces due to a combination of technology, technical mistakes, and sometimes bad decisions, actually, because if you don't know what song you're going to play next, sometimes when you put another song into the mix and you add and introduce new elements to it, it doesn't work. But the thing was that it was exciting because firstly, you never knew what was going to happen next, and secondly, it was you'd get to hear songs that existed for maybe 2 or 3 minutes, and then they'd disappear forever, and you'd never get to hear them again. There are several Underworld songs from that period which the band only ever played live on stage, and they never actually found a separate space for them on any of their releases. Really interesting, exciting period. 1993 saw the band release a load of remixes. I've mentioned before, Simply Red, Left Field, 108 Grand. In 1993, they also remixed Human Behaviour by Björk, William Orbit's Water from a Vine Leaf, and Lush by Orbital. And the strange thing about that is they're not really remixes, they're more like re-recordings with parts of the original song kind of melded inside them. As I've mentioned before on the previous one when talking about Shakespeare's Sister, is that you get like tiny fragments of vocal melodies or keyboard melodies, and you get a completely brand new song. Very similar in the way that Aphex Twin remixed some songs. Aphex Twin allegedly was remixing a track for the Lemonheads. Completely forgot he was meant to do it. And when the studio rang up and said, we're coming to pick up the tape, it's time, he pulled out a DAT of the first thing he could find, and then just gave it to the courier and said it's a remix, where actually, of course, it's a new track completely. One of the great remixes that the band did at the time was this band, a Scottish band called One Dove, produced by Andrew Weatherall. If you think that Screamadelica is good, listen to the One Dove album, Morning Dove White. It is fantastic, and certainly as good as Screamadelica, in my opinion. And it's a great shame that One Dove really didn't last much longer than the one album and the 4 or 5 singles. Underworld remixed a track called Why Don't You Take Me. There's an Underworld mix on this 12-inch. There's a second remix, the Up 2 Down mix, on the limited edition 12-inch. Both of these are well worth hearing, by the way, if you get the opportunity to do so. And later in 1993, the band released another single stroke EP. I regard it as, I think it might have been their first CD single, actually, which was Spikey backed with Dogman Go Woof. And Spikey and Dogman Go Woof are 2 fairly long, deep house instrumental tracks, maybe 12-13 minutes each. They absolutely bang and hum, and having seen the band play Spikey live, it's a great experience, actually. Really designed to be played at a loud volume in a room with a low ceiling and dark lighting. And Spikey, by the way, was when David Bowie was putting together a list of some of his favourite records of the 90s, I think in 1997 for Rolling Stone magazine. He did mention that Spikey was one of his favourite songs of the decade. That guy, that was a cool hoopy fruit who always knew where his towel was. And there's a 12-inch there on Junior Boyzone. Quite how you'd have thought, well, how would David Bowie have heard of this? And of course, he was paying a heck of a lot of attention to what was happening in the world around him at that point, and was very tuned in. So there was a 12-inch again in the generic Junior Boyzone sleeve, and there was the CD single, which is here in a equally generic CD single cover. Not, the band's use of tomato as visual iconography and design hadn't really started at all at this point. I will post a link to Spikey and Dogman Go Wolf, which were great non-album songs. Maybe not ideal as singles. There's very little in them which is something that the milkman could whistle in the morning. But it's a fantastic little track that really kind of just bounces along at a great speed. And yes, I love it dearly. One of the things we get to then, and the chronology is a little weird and a little confusing around about here, because I think that the bands were releasing various songs in different countries and different territories, and it was never quite clear exactly what was coming out where. So, for example, in America, Cowgirl got a separate release as a single, and I think this is the only release of Cowgirl as a single at the time. Which happened is that there was this on wax tracks, then the version on CD single and 12-inch, which was on Intercord in Germany. I don't think it was released in the UK, which might explain why I didn't buy it at the time, because I wasn't going to pay £6 for an import CD single of something when you could hopefully pick up the ex-chart ones for 99p. That's pretty much how I built my record collection, was going to Woolworths the day after the records fell out of the chart and buying them at a heavily discounted rate. So Cowgirl here has an album version at 8:55, which is longer than the versions that's on any of the albums currently available, because the ending of Cowgirl, I think there was a section that was taken out of Cowgirl when the album was remastered and reissued due to copyright. It might have contained a sample of something, although that also happens on another song we'll hear about in a minute. And it's back with two remixes, the Windsor mix and the Irish Pub in Kyoto mix. Now, both of these mixes of Cowgirl aren't really remixes, they're alternate studio versions. In fact, up until probably around about 1999, almost all of the Underworld remixes weren't actually remixes at all. They were just alternate studio takes of the tracks as existed that the band had worked through in iterations while creating and recording the songs. And that reminds me, I've left a 12-inch single downstairs which I have to get so I can demonstrate this theory, which isn't actually a theory. So this 12-inch doesn't contain remixes of Cowgirl, it contains alternate recordings of Cowgirl. The Windsor mix has very, very little resemblance to the original of Cowgirl, and the Irish Pub in Kyoto mix has a completely different vocal, different structure and different instrumentation. It's effectively a brand new performance of the song. So when Underworld were writing and recording material, the impression I very much got is that they would try these songs out live on stage, and the way that they wrote songs wasn't the way that most people write songs. As I've mentioned before, the production of the album is very, very detailed, and I think that's one of the things that's allowed the album to have the longevity that it undoubtedly has. And if you go for the 2014 reissue version of the album, it has 5 discs in there of alternate recordings, jam sessions and things like that, as well as, by the way, a playlist called the Cutting Room Floor Selections, which also has additional recordings. So there's lots and lots of additional recordings. So when the band were writing the songs, they weren't really writing the songs in a traditional sense of plucking out a melody or vocals or a chorus or a hook or anything like that. They were instead building songs like in the way in which one would construct a building or a Lego kit. They were designing songs, and there were lots and lots of tiny little fragments of music that were being made and constructed, and that were then being piled together in various forms of ingredients like a recipe, and tested on stage, tested in the studio, tested in the rehearsals, to the point where the band felt that they had comfortably found the best possible arrangement of a song. And this is one of the things that makes some bands and some songs stand the test of time. I can't say standing the test of time without thinking about that wonderful lyric in Van Halen's Why Can't This Be Love, where it says, and only time will tell if we can stand the test of time. That is either a genius or a gibberish lyric. It's very possibly both at the same time. So Cowgirl, for example, there are several alternate studio recordings of the song, as you can hear the band working through various iterations of the arrangements, is that they settle pretty quickly on certain rhythmic sections, bass sections, and interjections in there. But then over time, they kind of try different riffs, different sounds, different types of motifs. And as I've said before, there's a lot in there in the Underworld songs that reminds me of people like Philip Glass and Steve Reich, and movie soundtracks. Is that repetition of constant motifs with slight variations within them, and then those are arranged in such a way as to build a foundation around which the song itself actually exists. And if you've got if you're writing a bit of music, and sometimes you've got a riff and you go, I can't put this riff in a song, it just I can't find anywhere this riff can sit. It's a real thing. And the songs that I write, I've got little fragments of songs, little vocal kind of sections, little tiny little riffs and stuff, and I've not been able to put them into anything yet, because I just can't find the space where I go, yes, it belongs there, exactly there. And many creative people have a similar thing. Filmmakers have a similar thing. There's been a couple of shots in a couple of films where someone's going, well, I wanted to put it into a film, but I wasn't sure quite where I was going to be able to do it. Great example of that is Raiders of the Lost Ark, where Tots, the very bad German guy played by Ronald Lacey. By the way, you'll see him later having his head melt off at the end of the movie. Sorry guys, no spoilers, it's over 40 years after the film came out. Steven Spielberg shot a scene in 1941, the film before Raiders of the Lost Ark, where you thought they was bringing out a torture device, and it was a coat hook that it was assembled. And it didn't work in 1941. They shot it again in Raiders of the Lost Ark, and it got a huge laugh. So sometimes you've just got to keep going until you find the right bit and you go, yes, there, that's where it belongs. So Cowgirl, like a lot of the Underworld songs, was constructed and designed through trial and error, through many, many, many different performances, many different recordings, many different versions of the song, until they finally agreed and settled on the final definitive version of what the song was going to be. And so, for example, the Irish Pub in Kyoto mix is a completely different recording with a completely different vocal line that has no resemblance to any of the other vocals that really you can think of in the rest of the song. And when we got to the 2014 release of Dubnobasswithmyheadman, the band put out a limited edition 12-inch. Here it is, res on yellow vinyl. This, by the way, is relevant, boys and girls. And this yellow vinyl was sold at the Royal Festival Hall show in October 2014. I went to it. It was an incredible show. But it sold out before I had a chance to buy it. So I later got a copy online. And this has, the standard 12-inch version of res on it. But it also has, on the flip side, one of the alternate performances and recordings of Cowgirl, the Alt Cowgirl C69 mix. And it's got a reference on there as well. I don't know if you can see it, from A1564. Now that may not mean very much to very many people, but A1564 effectively, when you listen to the alternate versions of the tracks that are on the box set, Rick Smith introduces each song with a vocal tag, just telling you what mix and time and version of the song it is. So if someone's going through unlabeled DATs, when they're playing them back, they're able to identify the song and version that there is. It's important to have your tapes and your backup material labelled, of course. Otherwise, you do a David Bowie, and when you do a reissue, you accidentally put the wrong mixes of some of the tracks on Young Americans and create an unexpected collector's edition. This 12-inch was limited to 1,000, same number of copies as the pink 12-inch, I think, of the original res from 1993. And the Alt C69 mix is also, I think, on the Dubnobasswithmyheadman version that's on here. Let's quickly check. I don't know if it is, actually. Yes, it is. Yes, it's the last one. But there was also a limited drop, I hate that phrase, 12-inch that came out in 2021. It was sold for 5 days through the band's web store. The band weren't able to tour thanks to COVID, so instead they released a series of limited edition archive 12 inches of unreleased material and t-shirts and things like that. This is the 2021, so this is actually the third UK 12-inch for Cowgirl, after the 2014 orange one, and of course the previous one which I showed you, which had res on it as well. This has two previously unheard mixes of Cowgirl on. This one is the ID2 A1804 version, so that's a different recording again, which hasn't previously been heard. On the B side, by the way, is one of the finest pieces of music that has ever been heard by man. This is the live version of Rez and Cowgirl from the Reading Festival in 1996. It is the definitive take of the track. It's incredible, and from the moment that I first heard it off a radio broadcast in 1996 till now, it's very possibly my very favourite Underworld performance ever, is Rez and Cowgirl at the Reading Festival. Needless to say, as soon as it went on sale, I'm going to have to buy that. That is, the thing. That is the one thing, the ultimate object. So Rez and Cowgirl, actually, from Reading Festival, would be one of my Desert Island discs. But since Desert Island discs is only an hour long, and this song is, let's think, something like 17.5 minutes long, I better choose some short songs for the rest. Of course I'm not going to, because one of my other ones would be 3 Days by Jane's Addiction, which is 10 minutes 45 seconds long. So when the band were pulling together the Dubnobasswithmyheadman reissue in 2014, they had to go and buy one of the old DAT machines, because they didn't have any that worked, off eBay, and then restore it back and then play back all the tapes and transfer them digitally before the tapes disappeared. And what you ended up with was dozens and dozens and dozens of different and alternate recordings, because the technology no longer existed to play these materials back. Underworld were working at the cutting edge of technology. I've got a full Kiteless down here, which I'll talk about when I do everything. And what it meant was that some of those sounds, when those machines stopped working, those sounds couldn't be reproduced anymore. And so they had to replicate them, and sometimes some of the live versions don't sound quite like them, because quite simply it's not like a guitar where you can have it restrung and changed. If the technology in there ceases to work, you might have lost it, and so therefore certain sounds will have become extinct in the wild. Sorry guys, fell down Steve's corner. I haven't even got to the album yet, which I'm going to get to. January 1994, Dubnobasswithmyheadman was released. As I've mentioned before, in the period just after that, Cowgirl got a release as a CD single in Germany, and the Cowgirl got the 12-inch release on Wax Trax in the US. This features the Irish Pub in Kyoto and Windsor mixes, as well as the first CD appearance on a Underworld release of Rez itself. Before that, Rez was only really available on mixed CDs and things. So, for example, the charmingly titled Disco Biscuits, which was the first place where I got Rez on CD, I think. And so Dubnobasswithmyheadman was released in January 1994, and I'll be blunt, I didn't buy it at the time. I was on a very limited budget, and I had very little money, and in fact I was thinking about dropping out of university at that point because I had so little money. And I realised I was 6-8 weeks away from finishing, and I thought, I'm going to have to make it to the end, otherwise I'm going to regret it for the rest of my life. So delayed gratification, folks, it's a great thing. And Dubnobasswithmyheadman, this really should have been a double CD and not just a double vinyl. This is the original JBO vinyl version from January 1994, by the way. And it's a very efficient 74 or so minutes of sound. How would I would change this album in a very slight way. I would put Rez on there, and I would put a track called Dark Train on there as well. That's the only thing I'd change. And then that would make the album 94 minutes and would have to be a double. It's one of the best double albums of all time, although most people don't think of Dubnobass as a double album because vinyl wasn't the dominant format at the time CD was, and Dubnobass came on one CD, and so most people thought of it as a single album. No, it isn't, guys. Absolutely not. It's a double album, 74 minutes long. And unlike a lot of their contemporaries that were suffering from CD bloat and putting tracks that should never have been on the album to give you the illusion of value for money by putting 18 songs on there. Yes, I'm looking at you, Tori Amos and Boys for Pele. That is an 18-song masterpiece. Or a 12-song masterpiece stuffed into an 18-song monstrosity. And Dubnobasswithmyheadman is To me, it's the soundtrack to commuting. It's the soundtrack to coming back home after a banging night out. It's the soundtrack to me playing on my PlayStation games like Ridge Racer and Road Rash, and other ones with R and R in, which involve driving cars. And then later on, the first Grand Theft Auto on a PlayStation 1 in the summer of 1995. I spent most of the summer and winter of 1995 and early 1996 listening to Dubnobasswithmyheadman whilst playing variations of Micro Machines, Road Racer, and Road Rash on the PlayStation 1 with its painfully limited technology that seemed like a portal into another world. So to me, this is the soundtrack to driving fast cars and riding on fast trains and night buses all the way through. It's, you know, you put on Dark and Long, and I can tell you immediately, you know, I'm on whatever, what's the word I'm thinking of here? Not pitch, not patch, but, you know, whatever track it is. And I'm driving a red car at high speed on the PlayStation 1. And that's one of the, you know, the main abiding memories I've got of Dubnobasswithmyheadman. It was an album I listened to when I wanted to be somewhere else. And that somewhere else was about 2 o'clock in the morning, dancing madly to Cowgirl very, very loudly. It's a great album. It starts with Dark and Long, which was the first single released after the album came out. And it was has its second track the LP mix of Skyscraper, I Love You, the same version that's on the 12-inch single that's over there. The third track on the album is Surf Boy, which is an instrumental, and bizarrely Surf Boy appears as a remix later on one of the 12 inches. And Surf Boy is pretty good, but I think I wouldn't put it on the album. It's not the strongest song on the album, so to put that as your third song, it kind of acts as almost a, you know, like a breather or an interstitial before we get to track 4. Track 4 is Spoon Man. I've seen Underworld play Spoon Man a number of times. It's a banger. There is nothing quite like it. And throughout the whole album, as I've mentioned before, you've got these tiny little fragments of music which have been built together and constructed to create something that's more than the sum of its parts. So on the alternate versions of Spoon Man, on the box set version here, there's a completely different set of riffs and sounds and vocals and things like that. And they're just as good, but they're just also completely different, and the two don't work well together. But Spoon Man is a fantastic song. Now the lyrics, like all of Carl Hyde's lyrics, don't necessarily mean very much when you try to form some kind of sense out of them. As I've mentioned in a previous episode, all of Carl's lyrics are almost like observations on human frailty taken from the borderline of alcoholism. They were hugely influenced, as I mentioned in the previous episode, by Lou Reed's album New York, where it's actually observing other human beings and how they live their lives, and then you're kind of reporting those back from the front line into the song. So you listen to some of the lyrics that you've got there, and you don't necessarily know what he's saying, but what you're very clearly getting an impression. It's like a collage or a montage of individual fragments of thousands of lives, thousands of observations, thousands of drinks, thousands of arguments overseen at train stations, around human conflict and resolution in the particular songs. And so the idea of a lyric like "I'm a spoon man, talks to God, transfusion, stepping razor," that doesn't mean anything. I don't know what that necessarily means, but then when you listen to it in the combination with the songs, and it's as I've said, it's kind of like if a CCTV camera or a computer could make its own music and was trying to understand human life. This is almost what it felt like. It's like transmissions from an alien stuck on the planet, trying to make sense of what was going on around them, and to be honest, generally failing. Track 5 on the album is Tongue, which is a very mellow song, probably the nearest thing to a conventional song with a verse and a chorus that's on there. And then you go to side 2, or more correctly, album 2, side 3, and you get Dirty Epic. Dirty Epic is a remix and re-recording and variation of the original Lemon Interrupt single Dirty, the first song which I got to hear on the Melody Maker cassette, and no, it was Underworld. And Dirty Epic is this stream of consciousness transmission from the edge of a city. There's a line in there where it says, "I will not be confused for another man, the pressure of opinions." Now, whether you know it or not, in the book I Am Dog Boy by Carl Hyde, that lyric is very, very clearly, in Carl's opinion, him talking about the way that people's preconceptions about him, the opinions that they had about him, the idea that he could be, a pop star or a rock star and write conventional, normal songs in other bands like Frere and Scream Gems and the early version of Underworld, and go, this isn't what I wanted to be. I wanted to be weird and unusual, and I wanted to be different, and so that line there, I will not be confused for another man. The pressure of opinions is around how other people's conceptions around who you are and what they think you are forces you to be somebody that you're not sometimes for a period of time. And I think Underworld only achieved greatness as a band when they let go of what other people's opinions were and lent into the weird of what they really were and what they really are. Again, no, we are weird, we are strange, and we do 12-minute instrumental songs that sound like one long continuous computer orgasm, and then you go, and that's what we're best at. And that is why I think Dirty Epic is an absolutely pivotal Underworld song. And as I've mentioned earlier, there's the Lemon Interrupt 12-inch of Dirty. I'm going to try and see if I can find it by just randomly pulling out 12-inch singles from here. It's probably not going to work. No, it isn't going to work. I don't know why I bothered. But that was, again, the Lemon Interrupt version of Dirty is effectively an instrumental prototype that was reworked, rethought, had vocals, guitar, new riffs added to it. And I think the 12-inch version of Dirty Epic has a different ending to the one that's on most of the versions of the album, because it contains some samples from the film Akira, which they couldn't actually get permission to use for the LP mix. So, then we get to Cowgirl. Oh God, Cowgirl! It's the best Underworld. It's the best single individual Underworld song that there is. And I mean, having done some remixing of Cowgirl a few years ago, what I've realised is it's about 4 or 5 different songs that are all stuck together. And as I've said before, you've got these individual slices, these tiny little repetitive riffs that are all built together and constructed together to create a crescendo of tension and release. And there's a couple of moments in Cowgirl that are just some of the best and most ecstatic moments I've ever heard in music. The bit where there's a long repetitive loop that reminds me very much of a spider's web. It kind of it's an arpeggio of different sounds, but it kind of rises and falls as it goes through various elements, and it sounds exactly like somebody took the best music in heaven and then put it onto a record, and then the whole song drops out, and then there's these huge bunch of like distorted, perverted stabs that come in, and then all of a sudden the song kicks back in, and you're like, that's incredible, because it's the little things. There's too many riffs for one person to listen to and go, that's a song. If you ask me what Cowgirl was about, no idea. What's the chorus? Hasn't really got one. But what it is it's a series of instrumental crescendos. Now, people were more cynically doing this in the early 90s as well. People with names like Two Unlimited and D-Ream and all those bands which I've mentioned. But they were designed as pop tracks. This wasn't. This was designed as a sound of joyous release of somebody that's finally been, liberated from the ravages of having to create pop music to do whatever they wanted to do, which is my way of saying Cowgirl is a fucking banger, and I absolutely love it. You put the album over onto side 4. I think this is side 4 of the Inner Sleeps, and you get River of Bass and kind of like a slight remix of ME, and the first single, Mother Earth, and it's barely different from the original, so I don't see any point in really kind of dwelling too much on that. So this is the Inner Sleeve here from Dubnobasswithmyheadman, and what you can see is kind of fragments of lyrics, this kind of stream of consciousness occasion. So if you're reading or you're looking at the Inner Sleeve and you're trying to understand what it means, it isn't really anything. It's almost like saying we're living in an age of hyper information. There's too much information in there. There's too many words. Nothing makes sense anymore. Kind of like taking a lead from U2's Zoo TV, actually, is that there's just a combination of words upon words upon words building on top of each other that you can't actually make sense of it except as some kind of abstract, which you kind of look at. There you go. And so we have got, for example, you can get lyrics here from an early draft of Confusion. The Waitress is on here. I think there's some lyrics from Born Slippy, which are somewhere on some of the Inner Sleeves here. It's just a whole mess of kind of like, there's too much information. There's too many words and there's too many things, and you kind of read them and you go, I can't make sense of this. It's madness. It's a sensory overload. I mean, yes, you've got Cowgirl and the I'm invisible on there, but that's about the only really kind of like memorable kind of like lyric which you can pick out through the whole thing. You've got some copyright information, but again, it's like kind of watching an artistic collage. In 1994, Carl Hyde and John Warwicker of Tomato, the company that did the design and the visuals for the videos, published a book called Skyscraper, I Love You. This book was also republished, by the way, in 1997. I think you can get it on Amazon, and effectively it's almost like you're kind of watching Dubnobasswithmyheadman, the book. It's hundreds of pages of typography, visuals, imagery that very, very clearly kind of, is an extension of the artwork that you will see on Dubnobasswithmyheadman, of words built on words, built on words, built on words. I think you can get it for about £12 now. And it's, I think, as I said, like a vision of Dubnobasswithmyheadman as a kind of like a publication, as an extension of it. Yeah, I love this album. In my top 20 albums of all time, one of my Desert Island discs. There was a single that was released from the album afterwards. It was a 12-inch. There was 2 12-inches and 2 CDs. And here we had Dark and Long. So the band went into the studio and spent months re-recording, remixing and reworking various versions of Dark and Long. So taking fragments from the song and then building new songs around it. If you are particularly completist, do get the 2 CD versions of Dark and Long. So the UK CD single is backed with an edit of Dark and Long. It's also backed with, I think, Dark Train and a track called Most Hospitable and 215 Miles. Now, Most Hospitable and 215 Miles are not on the German CD of Dark and Long. So with Dark and Long, you got almost 100 minutes of new Underworld music that was released less than 6 months after Dubnobasswithmyhead came out. And we had a new type of song that the band released at this point. So the German CD album, again, this I think is on Interchords, I could be wrong, is backed with a 20-minute track called Thing in a Book. And Thing in a Book is on one of these 12 inches. And technically speaking, it's a remix of Dark and Long, but it absolutely isn't. It's a new track in its own right. It's a 20-minute pulsing city soundscape epic. There's also Spoon Deep, which is ostensibly a remix, I think, of Spoon Man, but actually it's Surf Boy, because it's got the same kind of main descending bass riff as the middle of Surf Boy has. And then we've got Dark Hard, Dark Train, and a track called Burts. So you've got, I think, 7 new studio tracks released less than 6 months after the album came out. I've got to be blunt, they are fantastic. They are mostly instrumental, but they are also poignant and powerful kind of dance floor epics that are designed for home listening, as well as, putting it technically, absolute bangers. So on the 12-inch in the UK, we had Dark Train as the main single track, I think, and then Burts as the B-side on the first 12-inch. And then we had a second 12-inch, which had Spoon Deep mix and Thing in a Book mix, which isn't really a mix at all. They're brand new tracks, and there were 2 12-inches, so you were able to get almost all of those tracks released officially in the UK across various vinyl and CD versions. But if you wanted to get all of them on CD, you have to get the UK CD single and the German import 776 tracker, which runs to 80 minutes. As I've said before, 2021 saw the release of yet another version of Dark Train, and this, by the way, is in no way a bad thing. This was a 2021 re-recording of Dark Train. Dark Train is that pulsing track that the band play at a lot of live shows, and also appears in a film called Trainspotting, which changed everybody's lives, not to put too fine a point on it. In the meantime, in America, Dirty Epic and Cowgirl got a release as an extended CD single on Wax Trax. This featured the dirty guitar mix of Dirty Epic, the dirty mix of Dirty Epic, that is the Love and Interrupt version, and the album version of Dirty Epic, alongside the Irish Pub in Kyoto Whinger mix and album versions of Cowgirl, backed with Res and River of Bass as well, to make an 8-track mini album. Only 3 of the songs are already on Dub No Bass with my Headman. But again, if you're a completist and you don't have the box set, this is something that you will need to get. There are some fantastic mixes on there. 2014 saw the release of the 20th anniversary edition of Dub No Bass with my Headman. And as I've said before, the band went back into their archive of old DAT tapes. They bought new pieces of equipment to play long lost files, recreated the songs, and then gave us a 5 CD super deluxe edition. CD2, well, the album is on CD1. CD2 has The Hump, Eclipse, Red, Dirty Guitar, the remix of Dark and Long, Dark Train, and Spikey on it. And then CD3 has a couple of remixes of Skyscraper, I Love You, the Most Hospitable mix of Dark and Long, the Burt's mix, Dog Mango, Wolf and Thing in a Book. It doesn't have, by the look of it, Spoon Deep, and it doesn't have Whinger on either, so you will have to get the CD singles from the time. CD4 is an alternate version of the album. So in early 1994, I think the band, or early 1993, the band were kind of like circulating DAT tapes of what they'd recorded up to that point, with the idea of hopefully getting a deal. And a number of those tracks, I think, appear in similar versions on this box set. So the box set here, CD4, contains a number of unreleased songs which you haven't heard before, being Concord, Can You Feel Me, Birds, and yeah. That's about it, really. But they're great songs. Birdstar, I think, actually, they're songs that should have been on the album, of course, but then that would have made the album approximately 3 hours long. Let's look inside the package that we've got for Dub No Bass, the 20th anniversary version. You've got 2 CDs there. You've got a postcard for the Royal Festival Hall show. You've got another 3 CDs here. And you've got a detachable 60-page book of interviews, photographs and tomato artwork from the period. Again, this alongside the Skyscraper I Love You book creates a pretty definitive kind of approach in understanding and deconstructing what made the album what it is and what it was and why it's so important. There's so much material during this period. The band were furiously producing material left, right and centre without a pause for breath. I haven't counted how many songs there are. There's something like 60, 70 songs, mixes and versions which have been released around this period. There was also, as I've said before, the Cutting Room Floor mix, which was published on the internet. I think it was on Mixcloud, and I will post a link to that below, so which again has another 5 or 6 outtakes. CD 5 on the album of the 20th anniversary is the Kime Road sessions, which is the band playing effectively a live jam at Kime Road in Romford in their home studio, with 7 songs on there, ending with what I think is the album version of Spoon Man. So it fades out because there's not much point repeating Spoon Man, but you can put those all together. And finally, the final thing that the band did during this period, and I do wish this had been on the box set as a DVD or a Blu-ray, is that they released a VHS tape called Kiteless. And Kiteless was released in, I think, 1994. It contained VHS. I mean, come on, how retro is VHS? There, you can even see the tape is breaking down, so I won't ever be able to play this again. I don't even know why I've got it. But you've got Kiteless as a kind of like a 70-minute compilation of the band's promotional films and screen films at the time. This has Res, Spikey, Spoon Man, Dark Train, Most Hospitable, Cowgirl, and Oik Oik on it. Oik Oik being a B-side that is on the Pearls Girl single, which was released a couple of years later. And this is on archive.org as an MP4. I will post a link to it below so you can download and watch what Kiteless is
in its American VHS form, but really this should have been on DVD in the Dub No Bass with My Headman 20th anniversary edition. I think the world of this album. It expanded my mind. It opened my my consciousness around what music could be. You know, it tied together a lot of the thoughts and ideas that I had about music and presented them all in one place. So things like Tangerine Dream and Philip Glass and the KLF and Kraftwerk, and it melded all of those alongside a kind of almost a social commentary, alongside a huge amount of imagery that I think is iconic. It's one of the best albums I've ever heard, Dub No Bass with My Headman. And to me, it was very much a soundtrack to me escaping in my own head the world that I lived in. So I grew up in Birmingham. I didn't particularly like it or enjoy it. I didn't have a huge amount of money and I wanted to live a different life. And when I listened to Dub No Bass with My Headman, what it allowed me to do, it transported me like some kind of time machine or a sonic TARDIS to a completely different world where everything was better, it was louder, and there was a lot more fun. It's one of the most important albums I've ever heard. I adore Dub No Bass with My Headman, and I have barely got to scratching the surface talking about how important this band is. Next time I talk about them, I will talk about the second toughest in the Infants album. I'll talk about the live shows, how they wrote those songs, how they put those live shows together, and perhaps some of the best gigs that I've ever been to in my life. Happy Boxing Day. Take care of yourselves and each other. Stay beautiful, and I will see you soon. Bye.